Hey everybody, my name is Derek Collison. I work at Google on the AJAX APIs team. A couple housekeeping notes. I think you have the eval cards. Fill them out, make paper airplanes, do whatever you want with them. If you do fill them out, put them in the back. Also, I know it's been a 2-day conference and this is the last session, so thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for staying till the last session of the day. The way I usually run talks is I like them to be interactive. Some talks, they will say, keep the questions for the end. Please interrupt me anytime. The only thing I ask is that you go up to the microphone, so the talk's being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, don't do that. Wait till afterwards. But if you do and you have a question, don't wait till the end. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. So on the agenda, we're going to talk about the application concept. What this talk is based around is a concept that we had internally where we said, we want to do X, and how are we going to get there to do that? That application concept then essentially turned into a talk, and that talk is here. We're going to talk about the basic building blocks, what we use to actually build what we're trying to deliver on. We'll obviously dive into the AJAX APIs, both the background. Hopefully people who are in this room kind of have a little bit of a sense of what they are, but we'll touch on the search and feed and language APIs. We use all three in this application concept, and we actually use some advanced features of all three also. And so the goals of the talk, hopefully you will walk away with a sense of, if I actually want to go and approach an application, a gadget, and I want to use these APIs, how would I get started? This is a real app. It's really running. It's really developed the way we're going to talk about it here. I have the demo set up, and we will go back and forth between that and the presentation. I have obviously code snippets in the talk, but I also have an editor running behind there. So again, if there's a question, we can go as deep as we need to go. So the application concept, we had corporate kind of come to the team and say, hey, we've got all these blogs that represent Google. And I was actually very ignorant about how many blogs we actually have. So I said, well, we got 5, 10, and they said, no, we've got hundreds of blogs. And we were wondering if we could showcase these blogs in a way where it was a simple UI, shows everything that's going on through the Google blogosphere, so to speak. People can search, can categorize things like that. And so we brainstormed for a while. And again, this is a prototype. You might not ever see it in the wild, but it does run. So we prototyped some ideas, and we said, well, why don't we do like a tag cloud? Even though that's so 2005, I said, let's do a tag cloud based on the categories. For example, like mobile, Android, and developer, and public policy, and advertisers, things like that. But we also want to provide a hierarchical view of all the blogs, again, based on these tags. We want to allow search over the blogs, and that presents an interesting problem, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. We want to provide language translation where applicable. Google is a global company, and we like to feel that we have a global presence everywhere, and we try to do our best to do the best job we can there. A lot of people, though, only speak 1, 2, maybe 3 languages at most. We internally at Google strive to hit 40 languages, and Google, the search page, I believe extends into the hundreds. So the AJAX team had just launched a language API which fronts the incredible technology is machine translation that the language team at Google does. And so we want to do language translation and take advantage of the API to show how to do that. And then we want to deploy as an iGoogle gadget. And there's many ways to do that. Some are easier than others. What this one is a fairly straightforward way of wrapping up an application, HTML, JavaScript code, and putting it into a gadget. But there's a couple of little tricks to do that, and I'll kind of talk about how to do that the quickest and simplest way. So the basic building blocks. This is going to be different for everyone, but there's a lot of basic pieces that all of us have to figure out how to deal with. HTML, the DOM, CSS, JavaScript, obviously, tools, an editor. We have a lot of people at Google, and they have a lot of different tools. I'm an Emacs guy. I probably lost half the room in terms of I have no credibility anymore. Some other people on the team use full-blown IDs. Some people use VI. Some people use whatever. That being said, a challenge was actually thrown to me to learn JavaScript about 2 years ago. And one thing I held firm on was I said, not till it has a debugger. And when Firebug came along, that really changed a lot of things. And one thing I hope everyone in this room knows about is Firebug. And if you don't, please go find it before you start delving into any of this stuff. It makes your life a lot easier. And hats off to Joe for his original work on that. Performance, why slow? Again, another hat off to Steve. While he was at Yahoo, developed a really nifty tool that shows some pretty cool stuff in the browser. It works in conjunction with Firebug about how your app's actually interacting with the browser. And luckily, Steve actually works for Google now. For this application, obviously, the AJAX APIs, the Google AJAX APIs, are applicable. And again, we'll use all three of those, and we'll dive into those a little bit more in detail. What this UI application doesn't use is some of the other frameworks. And that's not to say that they shouldn't have been used. It's just for the purpose of this talk, I decided not to use any of that. So the HTML and the CSS and the DOM might look a little nasty. The JavaScript might look a little bit raw. But I did it specifically on purpose to kind of move those off to the side. They do some incredible things with making things very easy. I want to make sure that you guys could see all the raw bolts and nuts and things like that. And now there's a couple other things that's kind of interesting in terms of the basic building blocks for this application. One is Google Reader, and the other is Google Custom Search Engines. And so when we talked about the application concept, we said we wanted to do all the Google blogs, and we wanted to put tags on them. And the AJAX APIs that we're using in terms of search, feed, and language, feeds are, I want to load a feed. So let's say we have a tag called advertisers. How do I actually load a feed of blog entries that are all aggregated up under the tag for advertisers? And Google Reader allows us to do that, and we'll talk about that and how I actually use Google Reader to set these things up and make that work. The Google Custom Search Engines is another one. There's a natural reaction if you know about the APIs, and we're going to talk a little bit about the high-level stuff, but there's a blog search. And blog search can do some incredible things. But with hundreds of blogs, we needed probably a little bit different scenario. And Google Custom Search Engine was the answer. Google's AJAX APIs, search APIs with web, natively interface with site restrictions and custom search engine tags. So the way we actually do search is we just do a normal web search with a CSE ID that is specific to all the blogs that represent Google. And then, of course, iGoogle. Don't develop without Firebug. It really is that good in terms of making things a lot easier, even as you start adopting the incredible frameworks that are out there, jQuery, Dojo, even moving into Git. If you want to go that route, there's still something to be said for having something like Firebug. Works really well in Firefox. I believe there's some versions coming for some other things, but really made a difference, at least for me. So a quick background on the AJAX APIs. There's a RESTful data access layer, which is JSON and JSONP. Vadim, who's also a member of the team, gave a really good talk about how you can actually access that directly. There's a JavaScript runtime, which is a very lightweight JavaScript library that sits on top of this RESTful interface that provides ease of use and access to the result data. We play well with all the major frameworks. We're very, very small. But that's essentially what we'll be utilizing in this talk. And then there's the JavaScript controls and UI elements. So if you've seen any of the keynotes or Mark's talk or Vadim's talk, you've seen things like the slideshow and the video bar and the news bar. We don't actually use any of those in this talk. However, the feed control actually has a UI control that you can just say, hey, paint this feed on the screen for me. And what it has inside of it is a method where if you give it any feed entry, so in other words, the feed API, the low-level API, has an entry, and you give it any feed entry, you can call a static method to say, generate the HTML for this feed entry. And we're actually going to use that. So instead of reinventing the wheel, I'm actually going to use that feed control on the feeds that we're going to pull on, have it generate the HTML, then we're going to override the CSS to make it look well with our application. So again, on the background, it's comprehensive access to Google systems in terms of the search feeds language. It's end-to-end, so you can pick which point makes the most sense for you. In this talk, we're kind of stuck in the middle, and we use the UI utility function. And in Vadim's talk, he was talking more about the RESTful layer, server, side access. We have a very diverse customer base. Lots and lots of people are using this for lots and lots of different things. So we try to make sure that, easy things are easy and hard things are possible. You probably saw this slide several times if you've attended the other talks, but essentially the search API actually comprises a lot of different search functionality in terms of the web, video, news, image, local, book, and blog. And again, blog looks like the natural choice for what we were trying to do with this one, but it turned out not to be. The feed API is actually static methods, is what I call them. So for example, inside the search API, you're going to create web instances or a local instance or a blog instance. In feed, you have load, find, and lookup. And load actually works on an instance of a feed that you can generate. Find and lookup actually do some special things that I thought were interesting in terms of if you have the HTML version of a URL and you want to see if there's a corresponding link to that, you can use, I think it's lookup. Is that correct? And then find will actually say, I just want to see if there's any feeds about dig. So you can put dig into this and it'll return all the feeds that are associated with dig. So they're actually very helpful when you start playing around with feeds, especially if you don't know where to get to the feeds. And these are some of the higher level UI controls. And the one on the lower left is actually a dynamic feed control that I wrote. And it actually uses the same trick we're going to use in this application of using the low-level feed controls UI generation for the HTML. And then the newest member of the group is the language API. And it does translation and language detection. And we're actually going to use both in this demo. So it's kind of interesting to see Vadim put this slide together, which I ungraciously stole, and it's Dion's actually work. And we did a neat little trick in this application, different spin on how you might want to approach it based on your application. So this is kind of what the prototype looks like. And we're going to walk through this in detail, so don't worry about any of that. But essentially, the main view has categories, has a tag view on the top. It kind of has the detail view on the bottom, which shows the actual entries in the feeds that you're loading. And again, these feeds might be aggregate feeds. And we're going to rely on Reader to do that for us, and we'll talk about how we do that. The next tab over is blogs. That's the hierarchical view. And then we have the search results. At the bottom, we have a search form and a search control. So we'll actually go ahead and look at this actually running live. So again, you saw it. Go ahead, load up, generates the tag cloud. We've got kind of the detail view down here. You'll notice the T next to that, and we're going to talk about that. That's the actual translation code at work. All of these are the tags. And again, they correspond directly to feeds that Reader generates for you. It's actually kind of nice. So although I wish it was actually more complex, when you click on this, it's just simply loading a simple feed from Reader, and it generates the HTML down below using the UI control. We talked about the blogs hierarchical view. And so again, different view on the same thing. And remember, this was a prototype. I was exploring a lot of ideas. It might not be something you would ever want to do. Just turned out to be a really good example for this talk. But we wanted to put it in a hierarchical view. So again, everything's tagged. So again, when I click on policy, I'm loading that tag from Reader, which is all those blogs that roll up underneath the policy. Do a little UI trick where we do that. But underneath the policy, you can see there's the online, sorry about that, security blog, policy blog, and those are actually the real blogs that make up that tag. And in this view, you can actually click on one of those specifically, and you'll get only the public policy blog, which is the one I clicked on. And then Vadim, again, the other member of the team, along with Mark, we have a search control. So again, this search control is actually using plain web search, but is using a custom search engine ID, which limits it only to the Google blogs. I get the results back, and then I paint them similar to what you looked at the hierarchical view. Even though the results aren't coming from a feed now, they're actually coming from search results. And then the last piece of the demo, and we'll go back to talk more about what we're looking at, is when the T shows up, what's really going on is that the language API understands the current locale. And right now, my current locale is set to English. And so as the feed comes in, and as we're generating the HTML to render the entries that we're going to put in the detailed view, at the same time, I shoot off the snippet. The snippet's in white, to language detection. And I ask it, what language does it think it is? Now, language detection works really, really well as long as it has enough data to deal with. And that's why I don't send the title in. I'm going to translate both if I think I need to, but I only send in the snippet to figure out what it is. And then if it comes back and it doesn't match what my current locale is, I go ahead and I inject a T on that callback, which you're allowed to click on, which will then translate it to English. And if you click it again, it just puts it back. So what we saw, and what we're going to talk about in the rest of the talk, is the tag cloud view, the detail entry, the snippet view. The hierarchical blog view is not as interesting, but we are going to talk about it. But after you start talking about the other stuff, most of you guys, I'm sure, will figure out really easy how that was done. It's not rocket science. The search control and the results, and then blending those in such that it looks like a seamless application, and then the translation capabilities that we just talked about. Questions? All right. So how do we build it? The building blocks is we started with Google Reader. So the concept was born out of the fact that we knew we kept tabs on all these blogs inside of Google Reader. And we could use the feeds that it actually generates that are aggregates of the real blog entries underneath. The custom search engine, again, for the fact that we got to a point where we said we want to do blog search, but we want to do it over lots of blogs. And we got to the point where it wasn't actually feasible performance-wise to do that. But luckily, we're not stuck. We just simply had to go a different route to get the same result we wanted to. And the custom search engine is a really powerful item there. Anyone can create one. They're very, very easy to create. And then the ID that they will generate plugs directly into the search API, the AJAX API. Obviously, the AJAX APIs, all three of them, as you saw. Getting started. I will preface this with, this is the way I get started. I don't know if everyone else does it the same way. If you don't worry about it. This is simply the way I approach it. I always try to put out the UI in terms of matching the mock that we work on. So I usually generate the HTML and the CSS first, and the general DOM flow layout. And then we get right into Google Load and what that actually means and where we actually bootstrap the application. A lot of times, if people figure out how to just get the first piece, it's so much easier to get the subsequent pieces. The buried entries, a lot of time, is just how can I get the first callback that says hello world. So we're going to make sure we don't skip over that. Putting it all together, the application details of when we looked at the demo, what was actually going on, how that actually all worked. and then we're going to talk about how we wrap it up as an iGoogle gadget. So Reader. How many people use Reader? How many people create tags and do aggregate feeds? Okay, I was in the category with everyone else with their hands down. I didn't understand that it could actually do that. I would just simply put the blogs that I was interested in there. Every once in a while, I would check it from my iPhone, and go from there. Corporate, who we were working with internally, they get a big kick out of looking at the engineers and go, "Oh, you didn't know that?" They got a big chuckle out of that. And I said, "No, I had no clue." She said, "Well, you scoot over. I'll show you, what it does." And it's very powerful. So you can create these tags. You can add blogs to the tags. And it's kind of a management issue, but what it actually provides for you is what's the most powerful thing to me. It provides you the tag-based pages, both in terms of an HTML form that you can just read, and then, at least for what we're trying to do, is the feed-based form, the Atom XML. We'll talk about how we did the tag cloud, high-tech, low-tech. This one's really simple. And we'll talk about the hierarchical view. So in Reader, this is actually taken from the management account that people inside of Google actually use. And so there's a tag called official Google blogs-all. And that's all the blogs that we were interested in. And it's a tag that was created and was stuck inside of Reader. And so if you click on it inside of Reader, then you can see everything based on date of when everything's coming in. It's coming in, as you can see, from all different types of blogs. And I snapshotted this a while ago, but not too far ago. When you go into the settings and the management of the system, and you're looking under tags, and I want to switch to, let's say, adds verticals. What the neat part about that is that as you're looking at that tag, you have the ability to change the setting and make the feed public, so it's not private, which is required for the AJAX Feed API. It has to be something that Google servers can see. And then if you notice, it has a view public page. And it has an email link, so you can actually share things. But the view public page and the public setting is what we cared about. And so all of these labels that were stuck into Reader were all made public, and then we could go on from there. So if I click on that view public page link right there, this is what I get. This is obviously a quick screenshot of it. It's formatted by Google Reader, but it's a user visible HTML of all the blogs that make up that tag. When you stick this into a browser, let's say Firefox, Safari, things like that, if there's associated feed with it, that'll obviously show up, and you can actually click on that. And so at the top, if you see, it says google.com reader shared user X. X is a big, long GUID ID for the user ID. Then label adds verticals. The %20 is obviously needed there. But you get the gist of what it is. It's very, very simple how to actually generate those URLs, and then you can be looking at this. The little yellow RSS feed that shows up in Firefox, when you click on that, gives you something very similar and obviously gives you a feed. Now, the feed is ugly to look at, but for the purpose of what we're trying to do, that's what we want. And Reader gives this to you all for free. So now looking at the higher level components of Reader and the Google custom search engine. Again, the custom search engine is needed because to search over hundreds of blogs, this is the best solution. It's a single call. Custom search engine is highly optimized to do this type of thing. We get the results we want back. Works very, very well. www.google.com/CSE. If you have a Google account, which hopefully all of you do, it is literally this easy to create one. And there are a lot of options in there. Again, high-tech, low-tech. I'm kind of simple. All the one that I used was on the select some sites. And so all those blog URLs can just be pasted in there. And you just say, okay, I'm good. Create this custom search engine for me and give me the ID. And we'll actually see where the ID plugs in a little bit in terms of actually quantifying the search. So now we're going to look at the AJAX APIs. So we have the concept. We have, you guys have seen the demo, so you kind of see how things are working. The feed API is going to be obviously utilized to load the individual blogs themselves. It's all 100 and some of them. But it also is going to be used to load readers' tag-based feeds, like ads vertical that we just looked at. We're going to use a mixed format. How many people have actually used the AJAX feed API? Okay. Feeds, for the most part, come in an XML format. What the AJAX APIs team have been trying to do is make things as simple as possible. And so when we designed the feed API, we immediately went to what we thought was the right answer, which was JSON. We thought that for the AJAX type stuff, we threw the X out and we put the J in, and we thought that was a better solution. But we got to a point where we couldn't normalize all the correct data. And underneath, we actually are being normalized by readers, crawlers. And so what we do is we actually take readers' data and we actually then generate the JSON. So things like title and link and snippet and all those. Whether it's Atom or RSS, we kind of figure all that stuff out and they all come out the same. And it works out really, really well. So you don't need to know if it was Atom or RSS2 or RS 0.9 and all this other stuff. You know you just got title, publish date, author, link, snippet, things like that. But I can't remember who exactly it was, but someone quickly pointed out to me, yeah, that just won't work. Most of the interesting data is outside the realm of that, and we need to figure out a solution to that. Whether it's the best solution, the greatest solution, I don't know. But what the team came up with was an idea of where we said, okay, well then you can request JSON version or the XML version, or what my favorite version is mixed mode. And what mixed mode does is it actually takes and sends you the JSON just as we had talked about. So I got title and author and snippet and all these things. And actually takes the XML version representation of the feed and actually creates for each entry or item, based on which dialect you're in, doesn't matter, creates an XML node. And it attaches to the JSON entry. So when I ask for mixed mode, I actually get back my normal JSON stuff. I can do all my fun JSON things in terms of whipping through the entries. But then I can actually dive into XML and XPath stuff with the XML node in hand. So instead of doing an XPath from the root of the document and trying to find the right entry and the right source and the right ID, which is what we're going to do in here, what the AJAX feed kind of does, which I think is neat, is it attaches it to the node. So you don't have to go from the root. You know the entry that you have in your hand, it has an XML node attached to it, and now I can look up, let's say, the source and the ID. And I'll show you how to do that. Again, with the feed API, you get the feed control, and we use that to generate the HTML. So instead of me actually generating all the HTML for the detail view, which is down at the bottom, we'll actually use that to do that. Search API, again, blog or web. We go with web. We use the custom search engine. It's just a better answer for that. And then the language API, detecting non-native languages or languages that aren't my locale, and allow the translation in place. So again, the way I start doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way or wrong way, just the way it is I generate the div tree, the DOM tree. I usually call it a div tree unless I have to put a table in there. I usually slap IDs on everything, and I slap a class on everything, even though I haven't written a single line of code for the class or JavaScript. I knew that in terms of the little tab thing, I'd never done one of those, and I wouldn't recommend doing it. All the frameworks do great jobs at them. Just for this talk, I did it that way. I knew I'd have to have active and inactive, so I stuck those on there. So the whole top part of that is just simply the little tabs. We have a tab view, and we have a content frame inside of that. The feed view is actually the detail view, and the search view, which is where we're going to inject our search control. This is obviously skipping over the first pass of CSS, but you can see where the tab stuff are, the tab view, detail view, search view. We got some background images. We picked some colors. We got a logo for the complete container, but essentially there's no code in here. It's simply the DOM and CSS. So how do we bootstrap to the hello world so that the application as it's sitting now becomes an AJAX application? For the most part, when you're using the AJAX APIs and you're using the JS libraries that we provide for them, everything's going to start with the first script injection, which is www.google.com/JSAPI. Once you load that, that bootstraps our loader, and we call it a common loader. And the common loader started out as a convenience and something that was very easy to program against, and now it's become a pretty sophisticated piece of the AJAX API's technology. We do some pretty sophisticated stuff in the background, and if you were at some of the other talks, hopefully you know now that we've actually added some of the most common frameworks to the common loader. So Dojo and jQuery and Scriptaculous and Prototype and MooTools, and there might be a couple others, can now be loaded the same way that we're loading feeds, search, and language here. Once you have the bootstrapper loaded, the JS API loaded, you can simply say google.load. And so I load feed, search, language, and then I'm going to set an onload callback. So when all that stuff is available, I want to know. The application that we're designing today is fairly simple. It's fairly lightweight. And so that's all we're going to need. Each one of those loads, if you want to know when feeds loads independently, there's optional arguments that can trail out past the version number, which is always required. That can allow you to do that. In Vadim's talk, he showed how set on load callback, for the most part, does when everything is ready, but you can pass a Boolean as an optional parameter next to your function callback that says, actually, tell me when the DOM's ready, even if some of the external assets, like all those images and stuff as backgrounds for the divs, aren't there. This one, we didn't need that, but I encourage you to read the documentation on that. Again, easy things are easy, hard things are possible. And then in the set on load callback is the function that'll kick off the whole thing. And so I just called it OGB init, which is official Google Blogs init. Questions? Easy so far? So inside of the code, OGB init, I initialize some data. I think AJAX is great when you have to use it. So when I have to load a feed and I don't know what's in that feed, I need to call out and get the data in. When I already know the answer and the answer isn't going to change a lot, don't keep calling out and asking for it, right? So there is some data structures inside this application that kind of set up a structure that otherwise we can get by always asking the question and building those structures, and that usually takes like 2 to 3 seconds and about 40 or 50 AJAX calls, somewhere around there. That just doesn't make sense. So as Mark said in the fireside chat, if you're rubbing the cat the wrong way, you'll know. Those type of things, use common sense, right? If you know what it is, go ahead and set it up in the app. Download it with the original JS bits. Have the proper caching headers turned on. So I initialize my data structures first. Most of them are actually just inline. I just do a couple things in terms of reverse indices and things like that. I then hook the UI, and I literally usually call the function hook UI. You'll see it in every sample I write. And so essentially, I will actually, instead of keep calling, if you use prototype, $, or use jQuery, CSS selectors, or if you're low level like me, document get element by ID, every single time, I usually snapshot those and hold them in variables. It's just easier. So every view that I'm going to interact with on a constant basis, I snapshot those into variables and hold on to them. And then essentially, we're ready to go. And so the first thing that I want to do in terms of the application, the original pane window is the tag cloud. Again, the 2004 technology type stuff. So what I do is the first thing I do is boot the tag weights up. And this is a 200 level talk, I think, so it's an advanced talk. So everyone knows that a lot of this stuff isn't inline, so as soon as boot tag weights gets called, essentially it's going to make a call out for a feed, and then we're in limbo. We're waiting to get called back, and then we'll take an action on that. The boot tag weights is going to boot the top articles over all the blogs. So again, high tech, low tech, it kind of has a neat effect. And there's some very sophisticated algorithms about how to do tag clouds. I didn't do any of that. Official Google blogs.all, which you saw on a slide where it had all those blogs listed. I load that as a feed, and I kept the top 20, and all I do is I look at the source of the entry and where it is time-wise, and I assign a weight to it. So it works, and it actually has relevance, but it's really pretty simple. I need to get the mixed format of that feed. So all the other feeds, in other words, if I'm actually clicking directly on a blog, so not a reader blog per se, but a low-level blog, I don't need any of the XML. All I need is the title, published, author, and the snippet. When you're actually going through the application and clicking on inside the tag cloud, like I click on advertisers or add verticals, I also don't need the XML. For the boot up, though, I do need the XML because I need to figure out, based on the entry, what the source blog was. That's how I figure out then what that source blog belongs to in terms of the tag, and then appropriately update the tag. So we'll actually, I'll show you how I ask for mixed mode and actually how I utilize it to actually put together the cloud itself. So again, this is actually, these are code snippets, but that is the real code. So I do a URL from label. That's simply a helper function that does that, reader shared, user X label, blah, 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 for whatever label I have. I have a create feed helper function. Again, no prototypes, not object-oriented, nothing like that, just straight kind of functional JavaScript that takes an optional format. So by default, it'll use the normal JSON format. But for the first one, the one that we bootstrap with, I want the mixed format because I have to mess with the XML. So I set the result format to whatever that is, and again, we're overriding it there. And I set the number of entries to 30. The feed API supports any number up to 100. So I go ahead and get that feed returned, and I go ahead and load it and say, when you've loaded it up, call tag weights loaded, that function callback. As simple as that. Now here's tag weights loaded. This is kind of the one where we're going to try to fix up and make the tags. XML is a necessary evil. It is what it is. The namespace qualifiers on what we're looking for is the W3 org 2005 Atom. And as I'm looping through the entries, so these entries are actually the JSON entries. So remember, I actually don't have to totally abandon the JSON format of the feed and just do XML. We give you a mixed mode. And so I walk through the JSON array, and as I get the entry out, I assign it to a variable E. And then we provide namespace qualified helper functions. Internet Explorer doesn't do that necessarily for you in terms of the namespace. Safari and Firefox do, and I think IE 7 or 8 might do it, but IE 6 didn't at the time. And so I use a helper function that I know will work on all the browsers. And I say, get all the source nodes out of the XML node for this entry. And there's only going to be one, but it always gives you an array back. I then ask for the ID from the first one of the source. And in the next slide, I'll show you exactly what I'm trying to pull out. And so I actually have then, when I use the first child's node value of the ID array, I actually have the ID of that entry. So in other words, when I ask for official Google Blogs all, I'm getting a potpourri of entries from all different types of blogs. So I don't know where that entry came from. This is how I figure that out. So I'm going to pull out the ID. I can then take the ID, and with the init data, I actually have an understanding of what blogs exist where and what tags they exist to. And I actually use that to then trace back to, oh, this entry was from ads vertical. And then I can set the weight accordingly after I've ripped through all the entries. So this code in terms of the source and ID, the get elements by tag name, all that kind of fun stuff, this is essentially what I'm trying to get. So this is an entry in the feed that's coming back to me. And I have a source that has a GR stream ID, all this other stuff, and it has an ID in there. And that ID I can actually utilize because this entry came from googlegrants.blogspot.com. And I understand what that blog means by that identifier, and then I can trace it back to, okay, this is Google-wide tag or something like that. Blogs obviously can belong to multiple tags. So I just simply weight them based on how high they are, so how fresh they are, and how many times I see the same type of tag in the original 30 entries that come back. So at the end of the callback, essentially I've gone ahead and done two things. One, I've processed the mixed mode feed format and generated this tag cloud. So the tag cloud comes out, and essentially it is all the tags are blasted in there with CSS that defaults to the exact same thing. So they have all the same font, all the same weight. As I rip through all the entries and I figure out, I increase a JSON property on the tags themselves, and then after the fact, I whip through the tags and set the appropriate CSS class. And the CSS class then takes on the virtual weighting that I wanted based on what I saw in that original feed. At the same time, I also start whipping through the feed itself and generating the HTML entries down below for the detail view. So again, up top, a show feed. A show feed function is when you actually click on something in the tag. So if we go back to the demo and I actually click on publishers, that function essentially is what OGB show feed is. So I do a show status loading, which you probably just saw when I ran the demo. I go ahead and create the feed again. The create the feed understands the labels, all of those stuff, gives me the correct feed object back. I call feed load, and I do a function on the result. Now, this is where JavaScript gets kind of interesting. The reason I do this weird thing where I say function result, feed load, or result URL is I want to pass the URL in also to the feed loaded call. I actually utilize that for an advanced part of caching. I actually don't do any of the caching right here, but that's the reason why that function result call is wrapped up around there. In feed loaded, you'll see that we're actually not really talking anything about the URL. And this is a dumbed down version. I'll show you the longer version if you want. We're going to go ahead and whip through these. And essentially, normally what you would see here is you'd say, OK, start creating HTML. So either document create element div, document create element this, or concatenating a string for inner HTML. I'm lazy. So feeds come with a feed control, and the feed control can paint things on the screen for you and do some really neat things in terms of very simply getting feeds up on the page. What I'm using it for is I actually create a feed control, but I don't actually put anything into it. I actually tell it to create the HTML for entries. And so now every entry, just as when I ask for mixed mode, I get an XML node attached to the entry as a JSON property. The feed control create HTML now creates a HTML property. And it actually has generated the HTML for me, exactly like the feed control. And that will get us 90% of the way there. The rest of it is just styling. So instead of me doing all the creation, I actually ask the feed control to do that for me. The feed view, again, is that detail view. So then I simply just append those nodes as I rip through it. So again, on the feed control and the HTML generation, essentially changes the JSON entry into the standardized HTML nodes. Again, the HTML is attached as a JSON property, so it's very easy to utilize. And then we simply have applicable CSS classes. Whenever our libraries generate UI for you, we will put classes around everything. We will document the DOM structure that we're going to generate. And we also will give you access to and document the base CSS classes. So in other words, what styling we actually do as a base. Those are all on code.google.com. So for example, then, that is the detail view as it's being slammed in there with the append view. This is the structure. So when I actually ask the feed control to generate the HTML, this is actually what it's generating. This actually comes directly from our documentation. So It's going to wrap everything in a div with a class GF result. It's got a title, it's got an author, relative published date, and a snippet. And all those classes are available to you and have default styling that we think looks kind of good. But obviously, we did this specifically so you can override it and make it look any way you want. We have orange. You won't see orange as a default, but this app uses orange, and so obviously we're going to have to override some of these things. If you remember the slide that I showed you, kind of the base DOM structure of the application, the feed content view was essentially the detail view, and it was at the bottom. And so the way you can actually allow it to have the default CSS be overridden is you just make a more specific rule. And the way you can do that very quickly is if you have a div or a container that has an ID, which is the pound syntax up there. If you say pound feed content view GS title, that means any GS title that's found inside of the feed content view will now take on these CSS rules. And so we want to get you 85–90% of the way where you want to get to, but we never want you not to be able to do what you need to do. Sometimes you have to learn the kind of the tricks to do that, and I would imagine everyone in here already knows all these. I didn't when I first started. I think Vadim helped me figure this out. So these are how we actually go ahead and we're going to say, okay, well, we don't want any text decoration on the title, even though it's a linkable thing. I don't want an underline on it, let's say. Got some padding and some width issues, overflow hidden on the result. We've got the GF title A and the GS title A. We're going to change the color to that beautiful orange, which I know you all love and think is great. We'll set the font size to 16 pixels. And then we're going to set the snippet color to a gray, and we're going to pad it over a little bit. And so if you're looking at this down below, this is what we're talking about. So now all of a sudden the GF title is Welcome Orvis. By Alyssa 2 hours ago is now gray, and then the snippet itself is white-ish. Questions? All right. The hierarchical view, if you can imagine what we've done in terms of ripping through some of these things, it's pretty easy to kind of generate this. The init data call, remember I said a lot of the data was static, but some of it kind of gets pieced together. For maintenance reasons, the tags and the data itself are kind of kept separate. And so, the lovely Googler who got a big kick out of explaining to me how Reader worked, since I didn't know how to, she can actually come in and actually update those data sets if she wants. We can go back and forth. And so they're very simple. And then when I call init data, I actually stitch together which blogs go to which tags and things like that. And so once I actually do that, this view, for the most part, just falls out of itself. I can just go ahead and iterate through all the blogs. I know what tags they are. I know how they belong to each other, and go ahead and paint the UI. And then I put the little twiddle thing in case you want to collapse it. That's simply an on-click and a display none in terms of the div and things like that. So this is like, for example, the blog's data itself in there. Kind of looks like this. This data actually gets spit out by Reader. So I didn't hand code all 100 blogs. It kind of comes out for free. And then we have a tags array that I kind of added to the bottom, which allows us to say what tags these things belong to. So the search control. Again, you can go ahead and build an input box. You can build all these type of things. And that's okay if you want to do that. And this is supposedly an advanced class in terms of talking about some of the low-level stuff. But again, going back to my earlier point, I'm lazy. And we already have a search form that comes with the AJAX APIs. And you can create one just by saying new Google search form. And you pass it the search view. So remember when I said hook the UI, search view is actually, I've already looked up that document get element by ID. And so I pass that in, and I say, hey, whenever someone submits something, just call my search submit function. A search form is the UI piece, but it's pretty empty early on. So we go ahead and we fill it with a web search. And again, this was the decision between blog search and web search. And web search with the CSE. And you'll see here now, we go ahead and set the result size to the large set size, and then I say set site restriction. And essentially, that string is a CSE ID that gets popped out for you. It says all those blogs and all get entered into there. That's how that works. Search results come back. I actually place them up into the div, very similar to the hierarchical view. And then the last piece is the language translation in terms of actually building the app out. And so those T's will show up when the language detection algorithms, which are all asynchronous. So in other words, as I'm ripping through those entries, I'm shooting out the snippet to the language detection saying, just call me back and let me know what you think this is. And so the original demo will paint without the T's in it, then the T's will show up as applicable. And it's only when the current locale and the source language of the entry are different. Obviously, then when you click on the T, this was my UI design, so it's probably not that good. But I said, hey, I'll put that on there. You can click on it. It'll translate it, and then if you click on it again, it'll go back. I think the world of the machine translation stuff at Google, but it is machine translation. So one of the things I wrestled with was, should I auto-translate it to your language? And then the problem is that it's a perception thing. So you think that the app is showing you something and it looks really strange because it might have been translated into a language or from a language that we don't do a great job at yet. Remember, the neat thing about machine translation is it's not static. It keeps changing and getting better. So instead, I opted UI-wise to put a T in there saying, hey, I noticed that this isn't in your native language. If you want to see it in your native language, click the T. So now when we go back to that 4 entries loop, and we did the feed control create HTML, and we do the append child, which is slamming that into the DOM, right? So we can actually see that getting painted out there. I simply do a call out to Google Language Detect, entries, eyes, content snippet. Again, the more data you can provide to detection, the better. So I only send out the snippet for detection, and then I give it a callback and say, call me back. The callback is kind of hand put together because I want some other things bound into that. I don't want just the result. I want the URL and I want the index into which entry I'm talking about so I can find it. There's lots of ways to stitch your app together and figure out things. I'm sure there's, everyone in this room has a better way of doing it than the way I did it. I just did a simple bind on a function that would allow me to send those results into the callback. So in the detect callback, I actually get the result, which will tell me what language it thinks it is, but then I also have the URL and the index into the entries. The reason I need the URL is if the person quickly selects a different tag and swaps the URL, I might have the correct I index, but it's a different entry now. So I can actually make sure that I don't try to paint a T into something that I shouldn't. And then I just say, hey, is the result language not equal to the current locale? And if it's not, go ahead and add that translate icon. When you go ahead and click on that icon, I'm going to go ahead and make a call out to translate that. And again, I did some fixing up, which isn't shown here, about how when Google calls me back, that I can actually figure out who was being translated and how to find that element again. So I have the element ID and the result and the index in the process translation. So I can actually go through the feed view, find that child node, and then I say if element ID equals title, replace that, and otherwise it's a snippet. What that code is doing is that I send the title and the snippet at the same time, but they might come back in different orders. And so I actually go ahead and I say the element ID. Again, there's tons of better ways to do this than the way I did it. It simply worked in terms of what we were trying to get accomplished here. So I could put one piece of code up on the slide and you could see what it was. But essentially, title and snippet come in separately. You could also combine them and make one call and then tear them back apart if you wanted to. And then I set the node inner HTML equal to the result translation. Questions? Okay. So that was the app. So again, if you're looking at this thing here and we go ahead and reload this thing, it comes up, loads JS API, loads the original feed with the mix mode, generates the tag cloud, puts in these things, puts in event handlers, obviously, to all these tags. So YouTube, when I click on that, shows you the loading, loads it up. Search, same thing. When you go across one that the language is different, the T comes in. Google strives very, very hard to make things very, very fast. And if anyone saw Marissa Meyer's keynote this morning, she talks about how important it is. And I think everyone at Google takes that very personally. I know that the AJAX team does. So this is live. This is not canned. So every time I click on this, it's going to Google, and it's coming back, and the T's are coming back because we're sending those out for every single entry. So now let's wrap it up into an iGoogle gadget. iGoogle is a pretty rich environment. You can do a lot of neat things with it. We're not going to touch on a lot of them. We're just going to simply say, I have something that runs in a web page, and I just want to make it an iGoogle gadget. I don't want to necessarily do preferences yet or do anything specifically to the iGoogle environment, but I have something I really like in a web page. How do I stick it in there? This is essentially a base template. There's some module prep stuff at the top. There's a content type equals HTML. What that means is iGoogle is essentially going to wrap everything that's going to be inserted into there, into an iframe. And I put some options in there. I said, OK, here's the title URL for when it's running. Here's who I am, where I am, things like that. And I set the height. And then you'll see where it says HTML version inserted here. Essentially, we're going to go and take the HTML version and literally lift it in, again, Emacs, sorry about that for everyone who gets a kick out of that, and slam it into here. And then there's only a few other steps you have to do to actually make it work. So remember that all iGoogle gadgets run through intermediaries. So when you're on your local machine or you're on your own host and you say, oh, load this image, foo.jpg, foo.png, and you just say / or you use a local relative path, that doesn't work in iGoogle. So a lot of times the first thing people do is they'll do that and then nothing comes up. So a lot of times their CSS doesn't come up, any of the images, and so it looks like the thing's totally broken. So the first thing you need to do is know that when iGoogle takes this data, it's going to be vending it from gmodules.com or a whole bunch of content versions, 6.gmodules.com, things like that. So look at all your assets and change them from relative local paths to absolute paths. So for example, in here, I had a background which was the background.png. That was the one that said official Google blogs and had the shading and stuff like that. And in the demo, as we're running it today, that's what it looks like. But in iGoogle, you can't do that. You have to say background transparent URL, http://foo.com is made up, Google I/O background.png. But wherever that is, they all have to be static. And believe it or not, in terms of getting it to run, to look like that, that's essentially all I had to do. And again, this is simply saying, hey, we want to do something as an iGoogle gadget. I'm trying to illustrate to you guys the way I approached solving the problem. And I didn't immediately go to iGoogle. I actually went and developed the app completely standalone, used Firefox, Firebug, all the stuff that I kind of am comfortable with, Emacs. And then Vadim will attest to this. I can literally wrap these things up in about 10 seconds into an iGoogle gadget. That's how fast it is. Now, you can obviously start taking advantage of a lot of the sophisticated stuff in iGoogle, but to get to there took 10 seconds. So to wrap up, and then we'll take some questions, general documentation, the feed control. It's your friend. Be lazy. If someone else does it for you and it's good enough, use it and then just hack on it. Development tool. Still can't say enough about Firebug. And I think hopefully these will get posted. Another member of our team, Ben, wrote an incredible Firebug tutorial on how to use it and the power of it. I highly recommend it. Thank you very much, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just a real simple question on that last point about the images. Does that mean that my wildly popular gadget is going to serve images off of my server, or do those also get mirrored?
Say that one more time.
Yeah. Do the images in my gadget get served from my website, or do they also get mirrored like the HTML?
When I go ahead and make the call out to make it a direct path, it'll actually load it from foo.com in the example there. iGoogle has a lot of ways to actually have the iGoogle infrastructure fetch your images and cache them for you, and then your gadget can use the cache version. So for example, if your gadget takes off, it won't triple your servers. For this example, I just went ahead and served them off there, though.
You mentioned that you had the mixed format with the XML and JSON. Can you show us what you were talking about? I guess I didn't catch that.
Sure. For that one, why don't you and I will do it offline in just a second. But yeah, I'll definitely show it to you.
Then I have one more question.
Sure.
On slide. Oh, you know what? Never mind. That was the last session.
Okay.
Comment and a question. The comment, the T looks so opaque. You get back the target language. It would seem much more transparent to simply make the target language there instead of a T and then click on it.
Yeah, you're probably right. I failed UI class. The other thing too is for the demo, I couldn't translate into all the locales. So in other words, if you actually said the target language for a deployable application, you'd have to actually translate that into all the locales you think your readers might have in their browser. So for example, English would have to be translated to Japanese, so the Japanese user would see this thing is in English. But I agree, it's a good idea.
No. In other words, what it would come back is it'd say Nihongo, all right, which would be Japanese and Japanese, and but which would be far more transparent than the T, because I don't think T translates to a lot of people. But that's a comment.
No, it doesn't. Like I said, I took liberties with the UI, and that probably wasn't the best.
And then the question, this is more frivolous. Can it translate between British and American English?
I don't think so.
This is a question about the load functions that you guys were using.
Uh-huh.
Are they blocking? And I assume the follow-up question is that function that you used as a callback, I assume that is blocking if the others aren't.
For the most part, whenever you kind of do anything with AJAX, nothing is blocking. So the load calls, it's at our discretion what we're trying to do, but eventually, some point in time, we have to actually go back to the server and try to get that code. But we're not going to block in place for that. So even when we say the set on load callback, that will return immediately. So if we had like a little alert underneath of that, and you ran your code, before any Google bits hit your web browser, that alert would pop up. But what we've told the common loader is, okay, once these things all come in, and they're all put into place, however it does that, call me back then. So it's all asynchronous.
One question about iGoogle and your gadget. How does iGoogle prevent your gadget to access via one element by ID and break something else inside the page?
What it does is, and we're trying to figure out a better way to do this, but for the time being, the way it does it is sticks in an iframe. So even though when I put it up there, it looked like it was part of the iGoogle page, if you actually use Firebug and dig in, you'll see that thing is actually encompassed in its own iframe. And so I'm free to do document.whatever I want, but it's only particular to that iframe. So I can't get to anything else.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. How do you load the external libraries? Do you do google.load and it specifies the URL? Or is there any other way to do it? And what libraries can you load?
There's two ways to do the external frameworks. One is the way people who are coming into us and using us more as a CDN. There's an absolute URL, which is ajax.googleapis.com/something, like dojo. For the Google Load infrastructure, we think simple things are simple, and so it's Google Load Dojo. Google Load jQuery, that's it.
But is it going to include, like, if you just want a particular plugin or something like that, how do you specify that?
Currently, we don't offer the plugins because that's a challenge for us, and we're trying to think through how we might want to do that to benefit the community. But right now, yeah. So for example, the top-level frameworks are packaged as the framework providers want us kind of to, and it's google.load dojo, jQuery, and you give it a version, right? So you can specify the version.
Okay.
Or you can do an absolute script tag.
Oh, cool, thanks.
Thank you.